One thing I do is teaching watercolor to children, and I published some book for children in Italy. Hopefully now it's going to come out a new one for the year 2011. So children are really happy when they have to move the water with the brush. So watercolor, to me, it's like a fairy tale, and this is, for example, so it's the story of a man whose the derby hat is stolen by a bird, and slowly, slowly the man becomes a bird himself. And this is, for example, a stylized Italian little village, and this man is following a bird, and then becomes himself a bird, just smelling the poppy, the flower here. There is a transformation of the person, but I really like the quality of the transparencies again. So in one hand, when I teach watercolor to children, I have the brush, and in the other hand, I have toilet paper or just absorbent paper. So it's like a drummer. I like to use, again, overlapping. So some people claim that watercolor is very difficult. It is difficult, but if you are able to keep the color light at the beginning, and then you just dot out, you blot out the color, you have the advantage before the water is dry to just erase some of the things and then going on the top again. So it's a process like doing transparencies one over the other. So as you see here, the sky and the backstage here is less work. Then I like to go very obsessively almost in the little detail, and there are many, many dots again. This could be an Italian, Tuscanian little town, and the shape of the clouds again is meeting the trees here, and I like this connection in the Italian nature of the houses. The shape of the houses even reminds a cake, yeah, it's like a cake almost, all these little houses one over the other one. And I love to play with tunes again, with the little color one above the other. So first I do all the shape and with the red, and then I just overlap and I put some darker side. This is the quality of watercolor that I really like here, the roofs of the houses, each one. First I paint all the shape with a brownish color, then I go on the top doing again the little detail. So it's like a calligraphy, and just is a therapy for my mind, and children enjoy a lot, especially children who are between 7 and 10, 11 years old. I think it would be really a good therapy for the peace of mind to use watercolor every day, half an hour, before or after the food. So watercolor tend to be, well, of course, smaller, and also sometimes I think the big canvas, the abstract one, are like an enlargement of a detail of the watercolor. But in the reality, I tend on the canvas, I go, apart from the portraits, directly with the brush. And instead, on the watercolor, the smaller they are, I really use, instead of the pencil, I use this rapidograph, this China china, we say in Italy. So the main difference is that here is more like childish, and the technique, there are lines, where on the acrylic, there are, except for the portraits, there are no lines. And even in the portrait, I'm using the pencil, which disappear with the color above. And instead here, you really have the quality of the lines that comes out, the black with the dot. So that's the big difference. And the theme, also in the watercolor, there are houses like parody of little houses, little village, where on the canvas is more abstract. Or these big portraits. I never did portraits with watercolor, for example. I just did little characters out of my imagination. But I like to make an alternation between a watercolor and acrylic, because finally the question is to move with the brush the water. But in one case you have to deal with very small stuff, and many times I really have to use more and more the famous glasses, because otherwise I don't see anything, everything is blurry. And instead, on the canvas, you usually have to deal with something that is more or less, as you see, more or less 10 times bigger. So everything is different. The size of the brush, the amount of the water, and the transparency. But it's really nice and give you different surprises to use two different scale of work with two different technique. And anyway, it's always a question of moving the water. The thing is that watercolor, they call pans, the small candies, and really there I use a lot of water. Instead, acrylic is almost like a concentrated watercolor. So if you open the jar or the tube of acrylic, you have something much stronger, much deeper. The color of the acrylic is very strong, where instead the watercolor can almost fade in the white. It's just sufficient to put the brush with a little bit amount of pigment. Subject matters more in the small watercolor, I think, because here I visualize more a little world, people dancing together. It's more like, it's almost like if the canvas was an enlargement of a detail. So in the canvas, in some way, is more elaborate, the watercolor. And in the canvas, it's like a synthesis of the space. In fact, sometimes people tell me about my watercolor, you could even just stress out just one detail, and it's already like a drawing, like a painting by itself. So there are many more details, and especially, again, with the lines. So it's more like a fairy tale world. In fact, that's why also when many years that I'm teaching watercolor to children, I think it's much more influenced by the childish world. In fact, some people say that reminds the movie Yellow Submarine or some fairy tale. And acrylic are just more abstract, but I really enjoy the two of them.